So a good evening from India and a good morning to Megan ma'am there at her part. So it gives me an immense pleasure to welcome you for the second International Igniting Mind lecture series, the part from the Jagran School for Public Policy and International Affairs. And it is such a great honor for me to have Professor Dr. Megan Carpenter ma'am, a name that itself speaks a volume on her IPR knowledge and the concepts that she has and evolved. She has been regular visitors to number of universities, and it's a fortunate thing today to have this inaugural session with her. Why I'm calling this to be an inaugural session? Because this is indeed going to be the first of those particular premises where she's there. And as we were discussing also, so even she is eagerly waiting to visit our campus in the physical format as well. So without much delay, I'll just introduce the speaker for today. So Professor Dr. Megan Carpenter is the Dean of the University of New Hampshire Franklin Pierce School of Law, which has been a top-ranked school in intellectual property around the world for 3 decades. Dean Carpenter is a thought leader in intellectual property and legal education. She has extensive experience in institution building. Her talent for driving initiatives from concept to execution has helped to establish innovative programs in several universities. Most recently, she has led. Yes, sir.
I have been made the presenter. Should I close the screen or go my screen?
Sir, I'll just take it across. Once let me introduce ma'am, and then we can take it from there.
Okay.
So most recently, she has led creations of the hybrid JD in the intellectual property, technology, and information law, the first ABA approved hybrid program in a specialized area of law. It is designed to make a legal education accessible to working professionals in IP intensive industries. A hallmark of her leadership is a collaborative and student-centered approach. Carpenter writes in the area of intellectual property and innovation, including the book Evolving Economies, the role of law in entrepreneurship and innovation. She has written multiple book chapters and published work in the Hastings Law Journal, Fordham Law Review, Columbia Journal of Law and the Arts, Vanderbilt Journal of Entertainment and Technology Law, and the Yale Journal of Human Rights and Development. D. Carpenter believes that the learning best takes place at the intersection of theory, policy, and practice. She has received awards for her dedication to students, skills in program development, and her service to the university and community. Throughout her career, Dean Carpenter has engaged intellectual property law with undeserved communities such as early stage entrepreneurs, musicians, and grassroots arts organizations. Dean Carpenter practiced law at the Kirkpatrick and the Lockhart, now the KLM Gates, where she represented clients on the variety of intellectual property and technology-related issues. And not only this, her work has also been cited by me in my PhD thesis as well. So it's a dream come true for me as well to have her today on our board and to interact with you all. Ma'am, over to you. And the topic for today's is that the IPR and the policies in the global education. So without taking much of the time, I'll move to Megan ma'am for those particular things. I'll just take a second. I hope the screen is visible with the PowerPoint.
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Divasnu. I really am so pleased to be here with all of you today and am honored to have been invited. I was participating in a law school fair with some representatives from your university in Delhi in December. And at that time, we had some great conversations and thought that there might be a lot of opportunities for collaboration between our schools. So I'm really looking forward to exploring those as well. It is such a pleasure to be with you today. I thought I would tell you a little bit about our school, and then we'll focus in on how intellectual property and innovation are really at the center of some of the big challenges we face around the world today. So just at the beginning, let me tell you a little bit about the University of New Hampshire, Franklin Pierce. If you could go ahead and flip the slide. One of our big focus area has been intellectual property, IPR, for a very long time. And with IPR, we have, let's see, I might as well, okay, so I'll back up just a little bit and talk about some of the components of our law school. We have been ranked in the top 10 in the United States for intellectual property programs for almost 30 years, 29 years in a row. And we have one of the most comprehensive lists of IP courses in the US. We have the largest full-time faculty in IPR at any law school in the United States. And more than half of our faculty focus in this area. We also have the only IP academic library in the Western Hemisphere. So we're a hub of a lot of research. So if there are those of you who are doing research in the IPR space as professors and educators, and you'd like to come and be a part of that community, we would always be happy to welcome you. One of the hallmarks, we really have launched the careers of many IP leaders around the world, whether it's the head of Disney India, for example, or head of patents for Microsoft, or companies like Bayer, Pepsi, Samsung. And so one of the unique things about our program is that we've really taken a very practical and global approach over time. We believe that it's not enough to study just an area of law that is isolated, but how those connections are truly made and how they're made around the world. So we have a vibrant community of students getting their LLM and both in person and online and combinations of those that really enhance the discussions around our community. So with that background about our school, and I'm always happy to talk about the school anytime. I'm trying to keep that part short because I could go on forever about our programs. But I'd like to really focus in on intellectual property, global challenges, and a global education. IP and innovation are at the center of many of the grand challenges that we face. And having a global perspective on issues of IP can help turn those challenges into opportunities. So as students of law, and I count myself as a student of law, those of us, our educators, are always learning, and we really need to seek out opportunities that give us a global perspective. And we need to be thoughtful about providing those opportunities to our students as well. So today, I'm going to talk to you about both of those things, some of our grand challenges and the role that IP and innovation plays. And then I'll follow up talking about some of the kinds of educational experiences that we need to provide around the world so that students are prepared to confront these challenges. The IP system is fraught with uncertainty. As I always tell my students, if you want it to study and be an expert in an area of the law that you feel like you know what you're talking about all the time, IP is not the subject for you. It is constantly evolving, constantly changing. And the beauty of that is that we all, us as educators, as practitioners, we get to play a part in policy making and make a difference to think about how the world should look and how we can play a part in that. So as the legal framework surrounding human creativity, IP is relevant across industries and really provides the foundation for innovation and invention. Transactions in IP are the system of movement for innovation around the world. So sort of a snapshot US-wise, in the US, nearly 1/3 of all industries are IP intensive. About 40% of the gross domestic product of the US is based in intellectual property. employment in jobs related to IP is increasing at least as fast or much faster than the national average. There are increased salaries in IP-related fields, increases in numbers of STEM graduates, and the number of startups and new businesses that have been growing steadily has been that way for over a decade and is projected to only increase. So if you could flip the slide, that would be great. On a global scale, we see the same growth. Information is the economic driver around the world. Employment opportunities related to IP are increasing. IP and technology is important to trade markets. It's essential for innovation for industrial economies. And some of the most important social justice questions we face are focused on IP and tech: access to justice, medicines, health. And IPR is expanding. Data rights and privacy are two really important issues that examples of that. And certainly India has done an excellent job of thinking through some of those issues with regard to data, and I'm sure will continue to do so. The current global pandemic makes apparent the vital role that lawyers play in civil society. I've been thinking about that a lot lately as we go through so many challenges worldwide, that when there are times of chaos and disruption, lawyers are squarely at the center of that, and IP is too. So it's so important for us to be thoughtful about how we educate our students and the role that we play in law and public policy. And the work at Jagran through the Public Policy Institute is really phenomenal in that regard. Having discussions like this are a great example of one of the things that I'm talking about today as being so important to engage in this kind of global building of networks. So solutions to problems from climate change to international peace and security are based in IP. And issues at the intersection of data privacy are critical in the digital age. IP can help carve a path through the current pandemic, whether working to support vaccine development, on the front lines at the World Health Organization, developing online learning technologies like we're having right now, or helping to make public policy around public health and safety issues. So I'm going to talk about concretely some of the IP aspects of the global challenges that we face and how global education and IP is important to help turn those challenges into opportunities. So flip the slide, and I'll talk first a little bit about global development. And so much of this is a Venn diagram where all of these issues are impacted with one another. Transitioning from old economies based in commodities and industrial economies to new economies based on information and content is critical to global development. Innovation ecosystems implicate international peace and security and international human rights issues. Working across the world to transition from these old economy resources that are largely commodity-based to new economy is critical. Developing countries are often dependent on these old economy resources. And if we are to solve some of these challenges, we have to make the transition, not country by country, but look at it as a global system. Those developing countries need to be supported in that transition. And many of the mineral resources on which the rapidly emerging global knowledge economy relies are in developing countries. And that offers a vast opportunity for growth through largely untapped markets with an emerging entrepreneurial sector. The potential benefits of development partnerships, public-private partnerships, investment are substantial. And I'm not really talking about this in a humanitarian context. Everyone wants to be a humanitarian. What I really am talking about here more is the importance of assistance that is innovation-based. So let's use parts of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa as an example. Partnerships in development will accelerate access to innovations in health, agriculture, communications, and energy, the foundation for stable African economic advancement. And if intellectual property is the legal framework for human creativity, let's figure out ways to harness that human creativity to the benefit of local, national, and truly global economies. Health innovations might include vaccines, medicines, and diagnostics for tuberculosis, malaria, HIV/AIDS. Agricultural innovations include disease, pest, drought, and heat, and salt-resistant plants, as well as crops with increased yield and enhanced nutritional qualities. There are also some really important crossover health plant biotechnology innovations, including one great example I love is bananas that produce hepatitis B vaccines, or in a remarkable genetically engineered plant that morphs from green to red when it's grown in the vicinity of landmines. Communication innovations can include telemedicine systems, medical information transmitted electronically to improve healthcare via consultative and diagnostic and treatment services that are vital for regions that may not have access to good healthcare. We're experiencing so much of this right now, doing telemedicine more and more during the pandemic. My son just had his well child visit with his pediatrician, and we did it over the computer, which was such a new experience for me to see some of that firsthand. Green energy innovations right now include algae-based biodiesel production, and by providing opportunities for sustainable economies to grow, these kinds of advanced innovations truly drive progress. And that involves supporting universities in developing technology transfer offices, entrepreneurial programs, a global education for understanding how more advanced IP systems, more established IP systems operate. And this is truly in the best interest of developed countries that have greater stabilization, because we end up seeing a decreased risk of failed states, increased markets for products and services worldwide, and opportunities for mutually beneficial partnerships across business, across areas of technology. So really what we're talking about here is creating a kind of innovation capacity. And that is how we develop a global and knowledge-based economy. Let's turn to talk about public health specifically. I talked about that, we touched on that in the last few minutes, but let's think about the pandemic itself. The next slide, please. The pandemic is a great example of how one of my colleagues calls it a system failure that we're seeing around the world. The research that is being developed right now for COVID vaccines is very isolated. The research that is being done on appropriate treatments is not being shared. We have data not being shared between countries sufficiently. But the research in some ways has been nationalized and is operating in somewhat of a silo. As my colleague says, that the coronavirus isn't just a disease, but it's kind of a symptom of problems that we're going to see throughout the 21st century. And it's really those problems that I'm talking about today, and how IP plays such an important role for us to focus on, and how we can make a difference through education in changing some of those problems. So we're seeing over the last 50 years or so this inability or a failed capacity to bring together the human capital that we have around the world. We're not developing sufficient innovation ecosystems. We have all of this human capital, these resources, stuck in low-end manufacturing and commodity-based economies. But at times like this, it really shows us the need for networks of innovation ecosystems, globally interconnected ecosystems of human capital to solve problems that we can mobilize. Instead, what we're seeing is something that is disconnected and uncoordinated. It's inaccessible. It's not able to be mobilized quickly. And what we're seeing, I think, is the opportunity for us to recognize that and say, let's approach this in a different way with a coordinated response. That's going to benefit us across areas of public health, as well as food insecurity. And we need all hands on deck with regard to that innovative potential to rapidly address emerging issues as they come. And they will continue to come. One of the problems that we've seen, I think, with international organizations is that they're not sufficiently capable of doing this kind of leadership work. In a way, we're seeing a failure of leadership. But we still have to build those kinds of innovation ecosystems to build the capacity around the world. And I think that we, as educators, as people who care so very much about public policy and IP, we can work to build alliances for progress. International organizations can't often be assertive enough, but I think that we can push for change both nationally within our own governments, and then also start to build some of those research bridges and connections through university systems around the world. HIV/AIDS would be another example. Nearly 6 million people have died from HIV/AIDS related causes in some of the most affected nations, with high adult infection rates over the last couple of decades, escalating around the world in developing countries. But despite those horrific figures, when we think about what the world's major research-oriented pharmaceutical companies are doing, they're business entities that are based on traditional Western notions of profit maximization, individualism, and risk reward. And they make substantial investments where profits are expected. When we have this profit incentive, we're breeding a kind of innovation that does benefit society through the creation of new goods and new services and the dissemination of knowledge. But we also need to wrestle, with the access and human rights issues associated with that, the existence of a human right and the duty to protect and fulfill it. And then the ecosystem that can be developed and should be developed to innovate so that we, on a much broader scale, can be effective at solving some of these kinds of global problems. If we stabilize research in the world, begin to mobilize that human capital, and work in tandem, there is so much talent in some areas of the world that we will be able to tap into. Let's think about climate change as another example, and we'll go to the next slide. Climate change has IP at its core. Climate change in so many ways is imposing stresses on agriculture, on food, at a time when we have an increasing world population and we have more food that is required to sustain that population. So we need technological developments which might involve breeding of stress-resistant crops, for example. And IP is one way that we can incentivize those agricultural innovations. Climate change concerns have led to the identification and patenting of some of those genes that are stress tolerant. For countries that rely on geographic indications to produce commodities that are unique to a certain region, and we are so familiar with some of those, climate change can be a threat to the agricultural production and traditions that we've known. The Bordeaux region in France depends significantly on the wine industry for certain varietals. Bordeaux recently, last year, expanded the number of grapes that can be used to make Bordeaux wine, in part in anticipation of the difficulties in agriculture as a result of climate change. So new technologies have to be explored that help us navigate the challenges that are caused by climate change. The international IPR regime under TRIPS, the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, does establish a global IP regime that obligates states to provide legal protections for new plant varieties, new technologies, and also enables the patenting of stress-tolerant DNA in multiple member states. But as a matter of practice, a lot of the patenting work is confined to a relatively small group of life sciences companies, which results in market concentrations that have, policy implications, especially for developing countries. This is another area where we truly need a network of innovation ecosystems around the world. Policies are made on a national scale, but they have an international and global impact. I've been thinking about that just in this last week because as a silly example, the wildfires that have been so severe in the western part of the United States are causing smoke and air quality issues on the other side of the country. So here in New Hampshire, which is on the opposite side of the United States from California, we're having air quality issues. This weekend, the weather reports were showing smoke coming over. And so that is just a small example of how, our activities on a local level can have a global impact. And while that can present a challenge, I think it truly presents an opportunity for us if we harness the power of all of us around the world, especially as educators. Let's go to the next slide, because I want to make sure we talk about data and privacy, which truly is both a local and a global issue. In the digital age, people are producing enormous quantities of data on a daily basis, whether they know it or not. We increasingly rely on digital systems to manage our internal operations and structures. Our governments are relying on data to deliver public services. And more than ever right now during the pandemic, we're engaging in e-commerce, regular social media interactions, transmitting sensitive information, personal information, financial, health information through online platforms. And keeping that data private or protecting security infrastructures in both the public and private sectors is going to be an increasingly complicated and imperative issue, because that infrastructure may be vulnerable to exploitations, to breaches, to hacks. So there are serious threats of data insecurity and exposure to those breaches for governments and companies, and also to individuals. There are cyber actors and nation states that have mechanisms for exploiting those certain vulnerabilities. They might disrupt or threaten the delivery of essential public services. And the more that we are living our lives in part online, that can cause significant problems. There are local governments in the United States in the last couple of years that had their operations disrupted by similar attacks. A couple of them prevented a city from issuing health alerts, or it delayed water bill delivery. There was another city that where the system for police reports and employment applications were down for a period of days. So as we are particularly engaging in online learning and are at all levels, not just in the university and graduate programs, but for elementary school, primary school as well, school districts have also become common targets of attacks over the years. And so over the next decade, as technology continues to evolve, we need to be educating students and preparing them in a public policy sense, in a law sense, to address some of these problems. Data security in both the public and the private sector may face new vulnerabilities. And so in legal education, we have to prepare students to face these challenges. I want them to consider data collection and think about the consequences transferring data, to take the lead thinking about ethical aspects of collection and dissemination, to be involved in innovating with new technologies and other lessons learned, and developing attorneys, lawyers who know about data and are conversant in these issues is critical. And it's not enough for each of us to take a national perspective or to think only about how that impacts our locality or our country. Last year, I met with with representatives from several of the world's largest tech companies in the US, in China, in Korea, in the summer. And I asked them, each one of them, what emerging legal issues that we should make sure to educate students about. Because I really believe that you have to connect education, not just kind of in theory, but to what's going on in the world so we can make a true difference. And across the board, uniformly, they said, data. When I was asking companies in Silicon Valley in the US what the big IP issues they face, data. What's coming down the pike we should be sure to focus on? Data. So I think this is something that we really need to be heads up about and intentional about, because if we are not, I think there is a lot to risk later on. So let me touch on one final global challenge that I think IP needs to address and that we as educators can focus on. And that is interdisciplinarity. And so that would be the next slide, please. Whoops. Issues of intellectual property and innovation are increasingly interdisciplinary. Education, this challenge is going to lead us into a discussion of education, which I guess is a good segue. But I believe that we need a transformation of the way that historically we have approached education, especially in law. We used to think about intellectual property as divided into what I would call food groups. You are a patent person or you are a trademark person. And increasingly we see these IP and innovation issues that are overlapping and interdisciplinary. The innovation ecosystem that we've talked about has come up time and again in the last 40 minutes or so, as we've been talking about individual issues, whether it is climate change or whether it is a matter of public health. The true success in addressing some of these problems is seeing the intersection of so many of these issues all come into one. And so we need to think about ways to focus our students on interconnection, because the challenges and the opportunities really lie in that intersection. So you can see I used an illustration here of a Venn diagram, because for me that's the visual in my mind of how everything kind of overlaps upon each other, and that's the intersection that we need to focus on when we think about areas like blockchain or artificial intelligence, public health, sports. One of my close colleagues I work with frequently is one of the leading sports lawyers in in the United States, and he is a professor at our school. And as we think about sports, it has been enlightening to me to see, as he writes, he was writing for Sports Illustrated for years, and seeing the different issues that he's writing about, I truly realized that kind of interconnection in a way that is that is truly remarkable. And biotech, data and privacy, human rights, we see those same opportunities. There's been a lot of social science research talking about how diversity makes us smarter. That, research from psychologists, sociologists, economists, demographers really show that socially diverse groups are more innovative than homogeneous groups. And while that research has primarily focused on socially diverse groups, I would say for us to be able to bring into the classroom different perspectives, and that includes perspectives of people who have different experiences in different countries, learning together. I think that illustrates that the individuals with those different perspectives, when they come together and they share their unique viewpoints, that the positive results we will see increase. Without that diversity of thought, we will not be able to achieve the kind of innovation that we need, and that the initiatives that we want to move forward for some of these grand challenges will be made more difficult. We need to, as leaders, we want to make sure that we're showing our students that approaching issues with a number of perspectives, global perspectives, will enable us to solve problems with greater efficiency in better ways. So let's go to thinking about the next slide, which will focus us in on the educational piece of this. Thinking about how education should respond. We were just talking about this, sort of an expansive understanding in an interdisciplinary way of intellectual property and tech-related efforts. So one course that I'll give you an example of something that we did this past summer was a summer institute focused on intellectual property that brought in some of the industry leaders from around the world to teach in a virtual format. And made those classes available not just to our students at our law school, but students across the United States, and then also students around the world. One challenge we did have was the time zone issue. So we had a few students from India in some of our courses, and that really helped us. It bettered the classroom experience, because what happened was people who had very different backgrounds were all talking about issues that are current in intellectual property. So we talked about current issues facing licensing, or one was trade and doing business in China. We also had an issue. Course that talked about artificial intelligence, and we had one focused on sports, and where we had these industry leaders kind of coming in. Video gaming was another one that was very interesting, because when you think about esports and video games, it is such an emerging market that impacts also issues of data and privacy. I mean, it all kind of intersects there. So these classrooms, now that we're all learning online, we truly can have global classrooms in a way that was more difficult before. So even though we all wish we could be together, there are opportunities that we have right now to do things to create more diverse learning experiences for our students. And I think global educational partnerships can make a difference, not just in making that classroom itself interdisciplinary, but I believe that when we set up global educational partnerships, we can move programs forward that actually change public policy within our own countries. I also think that law is not just for lawyers. There are so many legal issues that impact various professions, that impact different industries. And so my job, I believe, as a legal educator, is to think about what lawyers need to know, future lawyers need to know, but also what non-lawyers need to know. That engaging them in the education too is critical. We can also, by doing these things, what we do is increase the students' credentials for employability. And when they get jobs and when they are leaders in their field, then they, that will kind of exponentially grow the success. Experiential learning opportunities too is critical. One of the things that I was really impressed as I met with several of our alumni in India in December and visited different schools were just the frequency of moot court competitions and engaging students throughout India in really thinking about how to dig into a particular issue and relate with other students as advocates, which I thought was wonderful. And then really to one thing that I feel very passionate about is that we have an opportunity, including through online learning, to bring alumni or leading practitioners into the classroom so that our students are learning not just from us as professors, but their learning experience is enhanced through hearing from people who are on the ground doing this work all the time. I'll go ahead and stop now. I know people may have questions. I would love to hear from the other panelists, esteemed panelists that I am so grateful to be here with today.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And it was just a pleasure for me for being an IPR student. And I totally agree with you that once we are students, so as academicians, we are also a student. And I can also recall I was there in Delhi when we met at the fair of the LSAC council that was there. So as in for now, we got a couple of questions popped in. The first question is, what role does the IPR plays for a career building, especially keeping in mind the public policy students? So we have students of public policy there. So what is the role of IPR in building or in guiding them to build a career, keeping in mind the IPR thing? So your take on that?
Thank you for the question. One of the things that I have seen over the last, I would say 15 to 20 years is just an explosion of IP as the foundation for our modern economy. So as we think about public policy implications of the issues that we have discussed today, whether it's, we're talking about data and privacy or, extending all the way to social justice, there are issues, how we interact with technology and how human creativity is harnessed for better or worse, kind of used as a sword or a shield. Those issues are critical to understand. And I also think will give public policy and a basic understanding of IPR will help make public policy students more employable because of seeing those interconnections. I would be interested to hear your thoughts on that as well as both, because you are an IPR and public policy expert. Do you feel, is that reflective of your experience or do you see it differently?
Yeah, I'll take it the clue from there itself, but what you rightly mentioned. I'd also like to expand a point on there that, you clearly mentioned that the IPR started with the groupism type of a thing, that trademark have a separate group, the patents have a separate group, and fortunately in India, the copyright regime has taken a boom, I would say. So if I can take like out of the three, the basic IPRs, the copyright in India has taken a very vast boom compared to the patents and the trademarks. Yes, of course, trademarks is there. But yeah, for the public policy students, I guess the best example, and which I can also take a hint from your presentation, was in relation to the data privacy, where our particular, like even for the privacy thing, keeping aside for a second also, but the data taken as in format of a copyright, which have been violated. So the data privacy bill has been longly awaited in the country. The bill has already been ready, and we are very hopeful that in seeing the couple of months, once we are out of this pandemic, we'll see that bill converting into an act, which would be there. And also, I totally agree with you that so much of the pandemic thing itself has created so much pressure on these, not only on the social media, but I guess these type of lectures also. So somewhere when we are connecting across and the internet and other things, so things are there. And this is where the role of public policy faculties and students comes into play. That how they are going to draft their policies, how they are going to understand these policies, especially when the IPR matters are taken into. So I totally agree with you on that particular notion. The second question is in relation to the data privacy itself, that how the policy, the policy should be taken keeping in mind the owners or the corporate side, or it should be keeping in mind keeping the people at large, or the balanced approach. He is also expanding that question, that because if we'll keep it towards the student approach or towards the citizens approach, the country cannot have that advancement. So your take on that when it comes to the data privacy, particularly to the IPR, which focus should be taken towards that of the corporates who are taking those particular things, or towards that of the citizens, or a balanced approach?
I think we need a balanced approach, because on one hand, I think that citizens should be, absolutely sort of the preeminent focus. But I think we do need a balanced approach insofar as we want to be able to incentivize the development of technologies that benefit citizens, right? So it's sort of it kind of comes full circle. And when I was in India in December, the bill was just kind of moving forward and had been approved at the initial levels, and talking about, one of the things that I thought was interesting was the focus on keeping data centers local, and keeping the data local and not having it kind of go, and thinking about some of the consequences of that, and how how that could be appropriately managed. And so I think that's a good example of, we want to make sure we're protecting the privacy and incentivizing local businesses, and not sending all of that valuable information and profit sort of outside. At the same time, we want to, again, with privacy and citizens at the center, we want to create global networks so that we can all solve problems together. So how do we do both? And I think there's a really delicate balance there, and we'll be struggling with it from through time. I don't know, has the bill changed at all since December, or is that kind of
No, ma'am. The bill hasn't changed since December, and I'll be saying that yes, I was been following that bill since last September itself, and I totally agree that the localization of that particular thing and keeping it at a central level in consonance with the government was one thing which the opposition definitely didn't want across. But again, keeping that mind of that local concept that is being there, such that the privacy thing should not go or should not leak out to the countries as to what we have seen across. The third question is in relation to the health thing concerning the pandemic, to where you started and to what one of your colleagues have also suggested, that more than a disease, this is just a knowledge not sharing thing, where the COVID thing came across and is now badly affecting both, like if I can talk about the US or the India. So these are the ranked countries among the top 5 countries who are getting worstly affected with it. So what role in the healthcare policy, does it not comes across with the IPR violations? So you haven't answered it, and then I also answered this particular question. So the IPR violation is a question in relation to the global pandemics, that if a vaccine or something is developed, and if a disease is also, if it can take on a second, that if it is also a developed disease. So the IPR violation in those particular situations. So your take on that first?
I think that the HIV/AIDS problem sort of foretold this, had some of those similar issues with regard to availability and access to appropriate medicines. Very different if you are in the US with HIV/AIDS, or if you are in Botswana with HIV/AIDS. There has always been a balance in IPR between the haves and the have-nots, and where there is, there are serious issues of access to technology and medication. So those issues have sort of been coming up to the surface for a long time, but I think that this pandemic really shows us some of the effects of those problems. And so I do think it has to be a balance. And I'm so curious to hear what your thoughts are, but it does have to be a balance to be able to incentivize innovation. And we want companies, countries, we have to be thinking about this in ways that drive innovation and drive it quickly. But at the same time, we don't want, we want to make sure that there isn't a division in survival from, developed and developing countries, that we need to make sure that people who need access to medicines can get that access to medicines. Now, one of the ways I think we can help solve that problem, and this is a problem that your students who are involved in public policy, this is a problem that, they need to focus on. So like we need to train the next generation to start to look at things in, with these kinds of consequences. But if we have a global innovation network, if we have this ecosystem where we're all kind of working systemically around the world together and less in isolation, I think that goes a long way toward mobilizing the kind of human capital and human resources that we need to solve problems, not in a national way or in a private business way, but in, to create that kind of international fabric that really is missing right now, as we've seen throughout the pandemic. So I don't have the answers to it, but I do think that this the kind of global network we're talking about can help find some of those answers. I'm curious as to your thoughts as well.
No, ma'am. I'll totally agree with that. And to add on this, I'll just say one thing, that yes, where it comes as an opportunity when it was a medicine, but looking at the present pandemic and the world's together. So I'll really use this particular nomenclature, that the world is together on this, whether it was India helping the US, or the US helping India, or Russia coming out with a vaccine, sending it across. Then also the leaders on that particular thing are playing a great role. Like I would like to cite Russia's example, where the first vaccine was given to Putin's daughter. So these are the couple of things that we are seeing across. Then the rebated rates, and I guess TRIPS has also provided on that. Not only TRIPS, the UN friendly nations, they have been agreed upon for things. And I totally agree with Dr. Megan when she said that when the HIV AIDS was there, so nobody knows this starting, they have been accumulating with which country. But at present, when we see the underdeveloped nations like those in the African areas are being worstly affected, so it was the US who stepped up through UN or through other agencies to help them with the vaccines or things which are available out there. So I totally agree with that. The last question is in relation to the education, especially during this particular time where like a small example is that, ma'am, if your lecture was recorded and delivered somewhere else, would you consider it to be an IPR violation? Although I know what a personal answer would be coming from Dr. Megan, but I'll take your call first on that and then I'll answer. So I'm pretty sure that ma'am is going to answer this in negative, that in any ways, because I've been knowing her, I cited her work in my PhD thesis, which was on IPR itself. So it was an online infringement of trademarks. So and then reading your materials as well. So I know particularly that she'll be like, no, you can put my lectures on YouTube. She has got no issue. You can play it. And but I'll certainly take it on a very neutral level as well. Like taking your example, but on a very neutral level, that people have been concerned that this material cannot go online, or this material should be restricted, should be taken with the permission or other things. So your take on that?
Yes, you know me well already. So that is, I think dissemination of knowledge is something that is critical, and that we as educators really play an important role in that. my only hesitation of that would be because my work is a compilation of other people's. I mean, I stand on the shoulders of giants, and I have so many, people. My colleague Stan Kowalski, with whom I work, is a real leader in moving forward issues of global development and emerging economies. And so he is one of my heroes when it comes to this kind of work on innovation. And so, as I'm talking to you now, many of the ideas that I'm talking about are ideas that he has talked about, that others have talked about. And so that's how collaboration and knowledge is, it grows. So when we share together and when we collaborate together, it advances that and helps spread the knowledge even farther. So I would absolutely support all of us working together and sharing that knowledge to move it forward.
Thank you so much. And I guess I'll take this opportunity to have the last question. So I'll take a hint from something that you hinted me, that we are open for some collaborative things. So as an head or as a person who has been following you from a long time, from my doctoral thesis days as well, and advancing myself in the field of IPR as a student. So I have got no shame in even calling me as your student. So it would be a privilege to be working with you. If something comes across, it would be a privilege of my university to get into a collaborative thing across with you on IPR, on public policy, or even the mergers of the thing as well. So it would be really nice to have it, and I'll surely write you ahead with that particular thing. Thank you so much for that hinting. So the question was in relation that how can we proceed because IPR, again, with the public policies and things. I know because public policy is a wider ambit which includes each and every section of the law, be it so it's criminal law, be it so it's public international law, be it so it's IPR itself. So how can we expand ourselves? And the reason why I'm asking this question, we are a very new and an emerging school in the fields of public policy. So how can we expand and take, in short, like taking your collaboration, your support, your help into expanding the knowledge and the horizons to our students particularly?
Oh, I think that that's such an exciting thing to think about, and that we really, especially now where we can think in two ways. One, we can think about doing things in person once the pandemic is over. We can also think about using this opportunity that we have online to create learning opportunities for our students. Perhaps they could be students in the same classroom, taking classes with one another. One of the things that I believe is important is getting students the opportunity to learn from people who are practicing in that area. So if there are, when you have public policy students that might be focused in criminal law, when they're focused in, agriculture and food, when they're focused in health, I think having the opportunity to learn from people who are in those areas can really be inspirational to them, but also can help ground some of the theory that they're learning as they're engaging in graduate research. That, for me, I feel like the theory informs the practice, and then the practice really grounds the theory in reality. And so that would be, one opportunity I see. We have master's programs where we have students that really do research where, part of it they are online, part of it they are in person. We also have increased opportunity in India right now with the recent bill that is allowing, I think, US universities to operate in India in an increased way. And so that's something that we're looking into, to think about possible collaboration so that we can do some of the things that you're talking about in a more meaningful and institutional way. Because truly, we can, having one-off experiences with a student. So we took some students to Silicon Valley to learn about IPR from the heads of IP at Google and Uber and Samsung and Apple. and Microsoft last January, and we had 2 students from India who came to join us in that program. And I think more educational experiences where we are collaborating together will help move forward some of the things we're talking about.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. And I guess these were the few of the insights which even I was having in my mind. The collaborative teaching as well. And also for that thing, the School of Public Policy, right from its inception days, is following what the university has been doing. So we at Jagran Lakecity University, Bhopal in India, get this feature of calling the industry experts. So this International Igniting Mind lecture series was focused on the academic side. But the second session of the International Igniting Mind lectures, we will certainly have the people from the industries as well. And we'll be happy to know that at the School of Public Policy and International Affairs, we have organized, or we have taken this initiative to join a Wow Wednesday, which is a words of wisdom. And all these people from the industry sides, specializing or heading the public policy or the government relations department at various MNCs, Amazon, your Walmart. So these people are there and they have agreed to be there on our boards. So people from Dell are there. So that this gives us a strength, and the same strength, I guess, which we got from you today. And believe me, it's such a pleasure for me. So both in the capacity of an head for this institution and as a student for IPR, to have your words today and to get in conversation with you today. Although yes, through virtual thing, it would have been superb to meet you in person. But we all hope and all our good wishes to think that this pandemic ends soon, and we can get you on our campus as well.
I will look forward to that. And if there's anything, if your students want to do any collaborative, if they want to come and study at our school for a little while, 6 months, a year, whatever, we're happy to try to accommodate them however we can.
Surely, ma'am. And I guess we have the law school as well, where the students are planning to pursue their masters or the LLM course in IPR. So I guess it would be a great opportunity to get to the pinnacle of those institutions in IPR in the world. So it would be a great pleasure, and I guess your support and cooperation would be there for all those students as well.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for having me today. This was such a pleasure.
It was indeed our pleasure, Megan ma'am, to host you here, and it never felt that we are just having an interaction for the first time. So that ever igniting minds that we have today, or the session that was called as the Igniting Minds, surely you have ignited our minds. And believe me, apart from the knowledge, the wonderful smile that you have always possessed throughout this session is one thing that has made us all feel positive as well. So I would also remind this that although yes, it's an evening or it's a nearly night time in India, so there is an early morning where Megan ma'am is. And thank you so much, ma'am, for sparing out your time from this busy schedule of yours. It was a pleasure. It was lovely to host you. And we'll definitely be staying in touch, for looking forward for the collaborative things. And surely I'm eagerly waiting to, and my university is eagerly waiting to host you in physical once this pandemic gets over.
I will look forward to that. Thank you, and have a wonderful weekend.
Take care. Same to you, ma'am. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.